Anyways, let's get down to some coding. That was a long exposition, I know. Okay, so I have what I'm trying to do now is get the for loop test to work. So knowledge map test for loops.text. Okay, so here are a bunch of different for loops that I want to be parsed. So right now, what happens is when I try to run this example, AST extents knowledge map test for loop test, it'll give a not implemented error. So this is a stub because the visitor for the visit for is a visitor for a for loop node. It has not been implemented yet, and that's what I'm going to try to implement right now. So what does this test show you? It shows you different ways you use for loops, right? So for elt in a list literal, for elt in a function call, for elt in a nested function call, for a tuple, I, elt with tuple unpacking. Now here's a tuple with tuple unpacking with no parentheses, and then here's some nested stuff in the for. So these are a bunch of kind of representative test cases I made up to show different uses of for. So let's actually just focus on the simplest one right now, the first one. So I'm going to comment the rest of them out, just for the sake of simplicity. Let's copy this into the AST Workbench so I can see what, I can get an intuition for what the AST actually looks like. So another really big benefit of this Workbench is that while I'm writing code, remember I'm trying to write visitors to operate on this AST. So it's really useful if I actually know what the heck the fields are and everything. And this diagram is really nice because it actually shows you all the fields and what they look like and all the subfield and children. So what does a for loop node look like? So for starts with a for node here, which is line 1, column 0, which is right here. And then there is elt, which is a, I guess this is the target. So target is the left-hand side of the for loop. And then the target is a name, which is elt. With a store context. So notice if I change this to something, it'll actually update live. So if I write something really long, notice how the name actually dynamically changes. So I know this is what I want. Let's change it back. Okay, so now what's the right side of the for loop? The right side of the for loop is called iter. An iter is actually a list. It's a list of and the list has elements 1, 2, and 3. And the body of the for loop is a print statement that just prints out elt. So there's only one thing in the body. So notice if I add a second thing to the body, print hello, it will change, and notice that there's body 0 now, which is elt, and body 1, which is print of hello. So let's change this back. Okay, so in order for me to get the extent for the for node, what I really want is to be able to, I want this for node to last up to here. So again, another decision was to have it last through the whole thing, but then if you have a really big body with a lot of stuff, then it just kind of flows over. So I'm just gonna make a decision now for the for to only only be bound to the condition of the for, just like the if statement. Okay, so how do I do that? I want to basically set the end column and line to this spot right here, which is really the end column and line of the iter thing in the for. So right now this is a little complicated because I have a list here, and the list has not been implemented yet, the handling for list. So let's just make it simpler. So for elt in, let's just say my list. So now notice how the node is a lot simpler now. That the iter is actually just simply a name, and the name I know how to handle because I've already implemented support for handling names. So what I need to do is just basically get the right side and the extent. So I actually have a helper function to do that for me. So visit for. Okay, so there's a not implemented error. This is old code from before. So another bit of context about this project is that this code was actually taken from another piece of code that I wrote about 6 months ago. So I have to kind of copy and paste and modify it. So I'm going to move this node. So there's a stuff below is implemented here. Let's move it down here. Make some lines. So basically how I organize my code is remember this is the big visitor. It's called AST extents visitor. There's a constructor, and then inside there's a lot of visit blah 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 functions, and each one of these underscore functions corresponds to a kind of AST node. And remember I copied and pasted this from a previous project I wrote, so all this code really isn't, most of this code is not relevant anymore, so I just raised a not implemented error for pretty much everything. So this being fail fast actually helps a lot because then I make sure that no old and stale code is executing. But at the same time, I still have the old code to look at as a reference. So I have this bar here, let's see, all the way down here, the stuff below is implemented. So everything below here actually works. So as I progress, I move stuff from the above the not working section down to the working section, remove the not implemented errors and start implementing stuff. And then hopefully the test pass. So the for is actually very similar to the rest of these other ones. So I created a helper function called standard visitor that I think I can just use this wholesale. I think this should work. So I'm going to explain what this is. Let's get the tab in right. Okay, so what this standard visitor does is that it basically, the standard idiom that a lot of these nodes use is basically you just want to grab the end call, which is the end column, and the end line number from the rightmost attribute. So here, for example, in the for loop node, the rightmost attribute is an attribute called iter, which is this one right here, right? So target is this one, iter is this one. What this says is just grab the rightmost, the end column and end line from whatever the rightmost attribute is, which is called iter. So the reason why I need to write this in the Workbench is I want to see that, in fact, yes, iter is the rightmost attribute. So if I do that properly, I think all this stuff will take care of itself. So I know this is not a super exciting piece of code to write, but let's test it and see what happens. So let's go back to our for loop test. So now if I run it, what's going to happen? Uh-oh. another not implemented error. And now it says visit list is not implemented. And the reason why is because let's actually look at the for loop test. So notice how the rightmost thing, this iter thing, it's recursing into it, right? It's actually trying to get the end column and end line out from this. But the problem is that this thing is itself a list. So I don't know how to handle lists yet. So let's simplify this example even more to this one. So for elt in my list, which is it's just simply a name now. So we know how to handle names. So let's paste this in. So recall that this test file just has this part now. Now let's run it again. So I'm going to close the screen and we'll run it again. And lo and behold, this works. So ignore all the comments and just focus on this part, which is for elt in my list. So let's eyeball to see if this looks like it worked. So so the for node says for elt in my list. This is exactly what I wanted, right? I wanted it to set the end column in line so that when I highlight over for elt in my list, it will correspond to this for node. Yep, and then name is elt. This other thing is my list, and then the print is print elt is all good. So this is the key part right here. I want to get it working. So in order to illustrate that this actually worked, let me try to break it just to show, just as an illustration. So yeah, this uses another helper. So recall that the for uses the standard visitor, and the standard visitor basically sets the start and end offset. So let's say I actually break it. Let's say I do node.endCall minus equals 1. So let's say I set the end column to, I just set the end column back 1, and let's see what happens. So I'm going to run the code again. So recall that this for loop covers for elt in my list. If I set the thing back, notice how it says for elt in my list, LIS, and I cut off the T in the end. It's because the end column is off by 1. So if I put the end column down by 2, it will say my LI and miss ST. So this is showing this is actually the code that's running. So let me restore it so now it works. So now it's for elt in my list. So I'm perfectly covering this right here. Okay, so that seemed to work. So this is pretty standard. So let's now tackle the list. Let's actually tackle the list problem. So let's make it a little harder for ourselves by putting 1, 2, 3 here. So we want to actually get this to work with the right side as a list, which means we need to actually get the extent working, the end columns and end lines working for a list as well. So in order to do that, let's solve a simpler problem. Let's just have 1, 2, 3 by itself. So what does this look like? This looks like an expression that's a list, and it has 3 elements, 1, 2, and 3. These are just numbers. So once we solve the simpler problem, once we get this information, we should be able to percolate it up to the for loop. So how do we do this? So now let's actually create a new test. We're going to create a new test file called tests, and let's create list literal.txt. So first one we create is 1, 2, 3, and we'll exit, and let's run it. Let's run ASTXsense on list literals.txt. So we're just going to run it. And lo and behold, not implemented error in visit list because we have not implemented support for lists. So let's actually implement it. So visit list is here. Okay, so what does this code do? Okay, so interestingly, I have code already for visit tuple. So visit list might be very similar to visit tuple, so we might be able to copy and paste very, very carefully. I actually like the visit tuple code because I wrote it a while back and tested it with a tuple test. So let's try to use a visit tuple code instead of this old visit list code that I just copied down. Because this code, this visit list code is from like 5, 6 months ago on an old project. Let's delete it. This visit tuple code I wrote this morning and tested it with a test in my test suite. So I think this is more reliable. And list and tuples are pretty similar. So I'm going to copy paste, everybody's favorite, and then change this to visit list. And now let's look at the